Talking head of you, but the majority of it is, in fact, you could be in this mode if you want to stay in PowerPoint, because it's a full screen. It's up to you.
Yeah, it just doesn't move. Okay, it doesn't.
Right, you want to go back to the title? Yeah, leave the title.
Yeah, animation doesn't work in this mode very well. So that's some slides are animated.
All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Joe Andrews here again from SupportLogic. And we've had a couple of great keynotes talking about the opportunities for thick data and better understanding customer sentiment and delivering a better experience. I am pleased to be joined by Deepam Mishra, who is currently at AWS, and he's a generative AI thought leader, and he's been a consultant and advisor to many companies in the industry. Prior to AWS, he was at Microsoft. He was also at Wipro. He's worked at some of the best and the largest technology companies. And he's going to talk today about the opportunities and the risks for generative AI in customer experience. As we've been talking about this morning, there are a lot of opportunities. There's also concerns that companies need to address in order to make generative AI enterprise ready. So I'm going to hand it over to Deepam now, and I'm going to go backstage. And please, if you have questions as we go through the presentation, add them to the Q&A tab, and I'll be back to facilitate at the end. Welcome, Deepam.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate the time and the welcome. I'll probably go in presentation mode. Thanks, everyone, for the time to join today, and good to talk to you about this topic, which is of very high interest to me. I'm less of an expert in customer experience, much more in generative AI. So I hope to add a lot of my experience that I've learned talking to startups and other companies who are using generative AI in customer experience. So let's get started. Before we launch, I thought I'll do a quick trivia to see if anybody has any guess on what this number may represent. It is, in fact, the rate of adoption of generative AI by enterprises this year alone. And for a new technology in sort of the first year of its visibility, I find this truly amazing. This is why I'm so excited about this topic today. So before we start, a quick introduction about myself. As Joe was saying, I have spent a long career in and around machine learning. A lot of it has been centered on startups and then advising startups and innovation teams in large enterprises. I was invited to share my views on generative AI and how it impacts customer engagement, customer service. The perspectives I'll share today are based on my understanding of the technology and what I've learned from talking to these companies. And as you'll see, there's a very strong bent of bias from what I'm working with startups on. In fact, I would also put some of my personal biases around the topic on the table before we start. I'm very passionate about machine learning. I've spent a lot of my career doing this. Even outside of work, I spend a lot of my time investing in startups or advising startups. And you can certainly say that I'm biased. So even though you might see a fairly opinionated perspective from me today, hopefully it'll also add some novel elements. So before we start, let's start doing some level setting on what is generative AI. We all have heard a lot of words and buzzwords around AI and machine learning. So I thought for those who are not steeped in the technology, do some level setting before we get into the rest of the discussion. We actually started using the word AI in the 1950s when it was meant to denote pretty much anything intelligent that we could do with machines. So you can argue in hindsight that even early calculators, software programming tools that did simple things like addition or even sorting numbers was seen as intelligent at that time. Then we invented a specialization called machine learning. Instead of following explicit mathematical rules, these machine learning tools could observe relationships between inputs and outputs of data and then try to mimic that pattern on unseen data. So the big deal with machine learning is that we could get machines to do things like nonlinear calculations, approximations, and even some simple tasks like sorting images into different types, like let's say dogs and cats. Then came the subspecialized category called deep learning. If you think of it, that's not that long ago. These machines used a deep layer of neural networks, which those not already familiar can think of as very large arrays of matrix multiplications. And this was done to learn deeper patterns between data input and output data. And with deeper patterns, you could make more accurate predictions about unseen data. This is where we started using machine learning and AI for decision making. And this was almost like state of the art till a few months ago. The latest kid on the block is generative AI, is yet another subcategory of deep learning. But this one seems to have some special powers, and in my opinion, some of them are still poorly understood. It's called generative because for the first time, we can use these machines to create unseen content, such as long-form text, new images, audio, etc. We will dig a little deeper into this for the rest of the discussion today. Before we do that, let's see how until now we were building applications in the enterprise. Applications such as customer experience and even others required breaking down the entire automation problem into multiple subproblems and then developing a machine learning or a deep learning model for each of these problems. So if you think about extracting key entities from a customer conversation, or trying to do sentiment analysis, or any other types of machine learning tasks, each task required building its own model. And as those of you might remember, each model required its own training data, its own process of training and hosting, and hence it was complex, time-consuming, and sometimes quite expensive for many companies to put together. So what has changed with the advent of generative AI is that we can now use single large models to supplement the use of multiple smaller models, as we were showing in the previous slide. Generative AI is based on something that we call foundation models. A foundation model is nothing but a deep learning model that is trained on very large amounts of unlabeled data and hence can be adapted to a very wide variety of tasks. Since these foundation models use self-supervised learning and transfer learning, they can apply information learned in one instance to a very different situation or task. Hence, they are flexible, they're reusable, and can pretty much be applied to any domain or industry task. So for example, a single foundation model can be used for pretty much all of the tasks that are shown on the right. So you may be asking, what has changed fundamentally with foundation models for them to be able to do that? Well, the biggest thing really is just the scale. Both the size of these models has exploded, as well as the amount of data that we use to train these models has grown significantly large as well. So this picture just shows you what has happened to the size of these models in just the last 3 or 4 years. So as you will notice, even a few years ago, large models were a few hundred million parameters. And now we are talking about more than a trillion parameter model. But the more important point that I want to make here is that somewhere along this journey, in the last couple of years, we seem to have crossed what I call the first barrier of self-intelligence. What I mean by this is that models which could erstwhile give decisions and simple answers, after crossing this barrier, started to learn the inherent process of human creativity itself. And they're able to mimic those insights. In other words, the system could now start to understand how painters, for example, paint, how software programmers think of designing software, and how artists and writers think of creating art. Let's see some examples on how this works. You might have seen many such examples of generative AI. This video was created completely for using text prompts. Now you can imagine the change. Now think of the operator sitting and writing a text prompt and saying something like, create a video of a water droplet hitting the surface of the water in slow motion while showing the background as a sunset. All of this was literally created using a text prompt, as probably as simple as this. Here's another example where the user might have asked the system to create a super resolution image, starting with a chameleon's eye and then zooming out all the way to a horizon or even the edge of the universe. So as you can see, we are only limited by our imagination on what we can create. So you may be asking, what does all that have to do with customer service and customer experience? And more importantly, if you are a business executive or a business owner, where should you invest your time and resource in all of this? Let's try to see if we can answer some of those questions. To do so, let me share my own perspective on how this inflection in technology is likely to be impacting customer service and a customer experience. Let's take a step back and think about ways machines have automated work and increased human productivity over the years. In the first era, which I'm calling as production automation here, machines essentially made repetitive manual tasks faster. So for example, in the customer service world, you might think of an invention like the telephone, which made the productivity higher. The second era of automation I am calling as the integration automation, where machines started integrating various systems and data across boundaries inside and outside the corporation. And the impact was exponential. This would probably correspond to the advent of the cloud and big data, and the use of systems like CRMs, contact center software, and so forth. The third phase of automation is what I would call as decision automation, where we started using analytics and artificial intelligence to drive faster decisions using data. This was the era of bots and was not that far long ago. The fourth era that we are entering now, I'm calling this as communication automation. Systems like ChatGPT have made it possible now for machines to actually understand us and talk to us. This is the age of generative AI. So for customer service and functions like customer success, so far they have been largely centered around human communications. Humans were a critical part because of their ability to understand, synthesize, sympathize, and even socialize with customers. It was both the most critical yet the most non-scalable part of customer engagement. Let us now look at the economic impact of this technology and these technology inflections. I'm using rough annual salaries equivalents of the jobs which are associated with using these technologies. And I'm trying to make the point that at almost every inflection point, we have doubled the value of the job associated by using these automation tasks. Using the same analogy, my prediction is that even the communication automation era will increase the productivity and the value of the people offering solutions using these technologies. Hence, I'm predicting that allowing the computer to automate communications, the human agent can now start thinking like a proactive consultant and transform the role of a conventional customer service agent into something much more of a engagement consultant. This, I believe, is akin to having achieved a business function transformation in customer service and customer engagement. So if you're thinking that this is too far distant in the future, let's dig in a little bit more to show you what you can do with this technology. One of the biggest reasons I believe about business function transformation is that these generative AI systems can break down internal functional silos in how we work in these roles today. So let me explain. This picture shows two different ways of answering typical customer queries today. So for example, a customer care query could either involve providing some structured data, which is text-based answers, or some unstructured data, just text-based answers, or structured data, such as numbers and data from some kind of a SQL database. In terms of unstructured data, for example, if your customer wants to find out what is the return policy of a product, or how can they get a refund, or how to file a service request, in these cases, agents today need to be trained on how to quickly find those answers, understand them by reading internal documentation, and communicate them through a dialogue. It often requires training and specialization in a particular dimension or a product. Structured queries are queries where you might have to pull data from systems like a CRM system or an ERP system through using like a SQL query. Unless these are very simple cookie cutter questions, agents often have to depend on backend support or IT support to query data from one or more systems and synthesize them. Now, let me show you how some generative AI startups are attacking these problems and automating them completely. For those of you still thinking this is futuristic, I picked up some examples from startups that I'm working right now to show you what is the art of the possible. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can run this without mute. So this is an example from a startup called wobble.com, which is a SaaS startup which does generative AI for AI-powered meetings. You can actually sign up today and start using this. It blew my mind when I started using it first. As you start the meeting, the system automatically creates short summaries of each part of the conversation. It automatically notes down and assigns action items that you can review. If you happen to join late, it will give you a quick catch-up summary. And even after the meeting is over, you can simply ask questions to the meeting about what happened during the meeting. Or you can find out things like, was the particular keyword used in that, or if there's certain action that you had from the meeting. This is really quite groundbreaking in how we think about engaging with content and communications. Another similar startup that I've advised and worked with is a company called Forethought. And I believe they are also going to be part of this event today, and you might be hearing from some of those people. Next, let me show you an example of a startup which is helping enterprises build their own solutions for customer agents or customer service agents. This is a startup which can help you build an enterprise-grade customer agent copilot. And in this case, this video, it's helping you answer some technology questions in case of a complex product support use case. I'll point out three specific aspects of this solution which are really impressive. First, when the customer asks a complicated technical support question, the answer would have typically required the agent to read and synthesize multiple documents across multiple systems. The Copilot system here provides an instant integrated answer, step by step and laid out nicely across. And this answer has been fetched from multiple documents. So if you can see, not only provides the answer, it also provides citation links from all the different documents where the information was used. This kind of citation and reference links can minimize the risk of hallucination on unverified information. Also, if you notice carefully, if you had more time, you'll see that the agent makes spelling and grammatical errors in asking these questions. However, the system is powerful enough based on its understanding of the context to answer them. Finally, at the end, the agent asks the system to summarize the entire discussion into an email with a specific subject line. The system beautifully summarizes the entire discussion into a single paragraph. It calls out the three topics that were discussed, and it automatically creates and includes a web page summary with a URL. Now you can see how the Copilot can free up the agent from searching, reading, summarizing, and then allowing them instead to focus on the customer. So many of you may be thinking that I'm only talking about the upside of these technologies. What about the downside risks and the popular media talks about in press every day? These large foundation models often are seen to hallucinate or make up answers and hence inaccurate responses. Many of these models are large and hence businesses don't want to host them on their own infrastructure. However, if you query these models on somebody else's infrastructure, what does that mean to data privacy and possible data leaks? Finally, anything which is bigger often it could cost more. So for single unit economics, does this system still work for use cases which have low profit margins? These are very important questions to consider. Before we answer how generative AI could be used without these challenges, let's see how traditional chatbots are built in customer service and customer experience. Like we talked earlier a little bit, today's architecture of making bots is complicated and a little brittle. It requires specifically recognizing multiple intents that you are waiting to hear in the customer's conversation, and then creating separate pathways to respond to each such intent. This is complex and requires a lot of work in building and supporting these models. With generative AI, in theory, you can have a single foundation model to replace all of the previous complexity. But with great power also comes more responsibility. So for enterprise-grade applications, I suggest looking at least 4 major challenges that these systems provide. One, we already talked about data privacy. Data residency means that keeping all your training data as well as customer data on your cloud instance 100% of the time. Accuracy here not only includes problems like hallucination or inaccurate answers, but also giving answers which are approved and validated by the enterprise or the business. And finally, explainability is and continues to be a big element in understanding why the model gives a particular answer the way it did. Now, if you may be asking, are these problems fully solved today? I would suggest these problems are not fully solved. We're making great progress in each one of them, but the good news is that most of these problems have, for some select use cases, have enough workarounds that and businesses are starting to deploy solutions in practice. Let me show you how you can do that as well. This is a picture which we had discussed before. In fact, this is a very popular architecture which you'll start seeing more and more in your workday in the near future. So imagining you're building a system which requires you to query information from a lot of your in-house documents, which are unstructured documents, as well as your databases, which are structured documents. There are 3 different steps that you can follow to eliminate or reduce some of these risks. The first is by putting ring fences around the data that you use and forcing the generative AI system to only use information that you authorize, which means the generative AI systems cannot use answers or information from every place else on the internet. And it will be restricted, the response will be restricted to the documents that you approve. Second, you can apply conventional privacy filters and access control like in any cloud scale platform that you build. And using these filters, you can weed out any private information or unapproved information going to the agent or even the customer. And finally, it is also possible to host the entire foundation model on your own cloud instance or at a partner who you trust. With these special constraints, you can minimize the impact of the challenges that we just discussed. In the end, let me conclude by talking a little bit about one of the most common questions I hear is, where should I start? Where can I start today without having to wait for the technology to mature further? Based on my conversation with early adopters, I will point out that 3 different application areas or use cases where generative AI can show immediate value. The first, as we talked earlier, is in building human assistance co-pilots or human-in-the-loop systems. These systems have been shown to improve human efficiency by more than 50%. In fact, I have been part of some customer service use cases where the efficiency of the agents can be improved by more than 80%. This is also an area where using human feedback, we can improve the quality of these generative AI systems. And by putting human agents in the middle, we can further reduce any risk of hallucination or wrong answers. The second area that I suggest is looking at generating deeper customer insights. Like we talked today, the conventional bots which were designed to do customer insights during calls or after calls were built in a very brittle manner. They could only pick up maybe 10 to 20% of the intent or the conversation the customer was engaging with. With generative AI, you can, in my opinion, try to figure out almost all of the information the customer is sharing and being able to use that information for insights across your business. And finally, a very popular use case is in natural knowledge mining, using English only to start doing analytics on unstructured data. So for example, so far we could only do graphs and charts on structured data information. Now you can look at an entire log of a customer service, maybe the last few months of customer service call logs, and ask questions to identify patterns or keywords or problem statements that you and many of the others in the company have heard of. So this kind of analytics using just natural knowledge mining is something really powerful and very new. So to summarize, what are the key takeaways that I would like for you to take away from today? One is generative AI is just another form of AI. It is, however, very powerful, can be fine-tuned, but does not necessarily require a lot of data, and for several applications can be used with very little effort and very little training time. It has the potential to break your internal system silos by making information easily accessible to human agents, which, in my opinion, would eventually lead to business function transformations. Finally, there are many challenges, but customers are already deploying the technology by ring fencing the data and making agent co-pilot type applications to get started. With that, I thank you for your time, and I will pause the presentation. Be happy to take any questions or comments.
Hi, Deepam. Great presentation and conversation. Thank you very much for joining us. We do have a few questions coming in, so I will share those and then have you answer. Feel free to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and we can just have us talking. There we go. So the use cases that you talked about are very compelling. And someone asked here, which ones of those use cases do you think will be adopted fastest by enterprises? We obviously see the consumer side of it with ChatGPT.
Yeah, so obviously, I think different customers have different priorities. I'm seeing the spectrum across startups and enterprises. If the question is primarily on enterprise side, I feel there are two camps in where I'm seeing the earliest work happening. One is in any kind of internal search, content search, information search. I'm seeing a lot of investments already starting. So people recognize they have lots of information trapped in text documents, call logs, support logs, many areas which were just not easy to analyze using analytics tools. If you think about for a second, almost all the analytics revolution that we've seen in the last 5 to 7 years has been all on tabular data, or at least categorical data. General text data has primarily been left unexplored. So I'm seeing a lot of value the customers are starting to see from investing there. And it's also lower risk in terms of the hallucination and the inaccuracy issues that we talked about. The other areas that I'm starting to look at, enterprises are primarily looking for experimentation. Most of them are looking for safe ways to experiment. And they're asking some of the startups that I work with, the most common ask is, can you help me build a ChatGPT type system inside a firewall so that I can allow my team members to start exploring the contours of this technology so that we can then map which are the areas where the ROI is likely to be positive. So I would expect that phase to continue for a while, but certainly a lot more heightened interest in that right now. So those are the two most common areas that I'm seeing. Of course, there's a long tail of many different applications and industrial use cases.
Of course, that's great insight to share. And that's a great segue talking about the testing and iteration to the next question. Do you think the rate of generative AI technology adoption will accelerate not only the usage, as you shared the stats for, but how fast enterprises can go from testing to production rollout, right? We've seen that accelerate in some other areas of technology. And what enabling steps do you think are needed to make this adoption accelerate, the how it's adopted?
Yeah, I think this, I don't want to pretend like I have complete answers, because a lot of it is still active work. But what I'm seeing from talking to customers and also looking at the technology evolution, I think there are many, especially talking about enterprises, there are many concerns that enterprise leaders have, which need to be addressed much more fully, which have less to do with the core of generative AI alone, but generally building any kind of systems using AI technology, like things like we talked about, predictability, AI performance monitoring tools, knowing why the system made a particular decision the way it did, and just general control and comfort over data access. I think data access and data privacy are the issues that are, for good reason, worrying a lot of business decision leaders. And sometimes I feel like they've worried too much, even without necessarily delving enough to see what are the tools available to solve them. But generally, I think those problems need to be addressed at a systemic level before the adoption curve can accelerate. I think that's one of the things that I feel will cause acceleration in adoption once we get these more systemic answers to these data-related privacy and other kinds of concerns businesses have. The other issue, of course, here I presume will be the ease of using the tools, and the tooling itself is evolving. When you think about large models, very few businesses will actually build their own models. Most of them will reuse models and fine-tune them, or even just use prompt engineering to do that. And tools to do all of that are still evolving. There are some great innovations happening, and I think that will accelerate in how do you use prompting as a discipline and a process to both build more useful prompts and then simplify the use of that, so that business users without having any technical knowledge can start using these prompts to build. So I think those tooling pieces, once they come together, will also accelerate the rate of adoption. So I definitely see the acceleration likely to happen, but it's almost like we will probably be in a pause mode for a while, and then we'll start to see the knee curve in adoption.
Makes sense, Deepam. There's a drill down question into specifically the agent copilot use case and the challenge around hallucinations. So the question is, how does one address generative AI's hallucinations in agent copilots? Does it require more human quality control?
Yes, it does, but I think there are some simple ways. Again, if you first is to understand, my first advice is for people to understand, why do these systems hallucinate? And if you understand that more, then you will be able to control it more. So as we argued earlier, as you showed earlier, foundation models are trained on very large amounts of data, and it's also unsupervised data. So you don't know how these systems have determined patterns that they are using to apply on new data. So unlike earlier AI systems, we had very tight controls on which input leads to what type of output. Here we have less of those insights. So in order to control that, first you have to understand, what are the levers that you have in your hand to limit hallucination. One very powerful lever that I talked about, and I will encourage viewers to look at if they haven't, is a new concept called retrieval augmented generation, RAG. This is a common word that is coming out. And what that means in simple English is you can restrict the amount of information that these systems have in order to build their answers on, which I was trying to show in terms of ring fencing. So you can actually tell these systems that you do not give me any answer that is outside of this corpus of information. And even if when you do give me an answer, give me the exact citation on which line of which page number you picked up this answer from, so that I can then go back and verify. And on top of that, I would also add human verification. So human verification is easier if you give this level of detail and clarity. And based on human feedback, it's not that sometimes these answers are wrong, but sometimes businesses will have to choose which is the better answer to give. So if you're trying to give, for example, a stock recommendation to a customer, you have to know which date and what is the risk profile of the customer based on which answer is better for that. So that kind of feedback from the users will help these systems make judgments better in terms of predicting which answer is the right answer.
Great answer, Deepam. There's one more question here. Feel free, by the way, folks, if you have another one, you can enter it now in the Q&A tab. So many companies have invested in knowledge management to build knowledge bases and serve the purpose of directing customers to self-service support, find the right answer right at the right time when they need it. So will the adoption of generative AI require new activities and new roles beyond knowledge management?
Yeah, again, this is maybe a speculative answer, is my own personal opinion, but I argued in the discussion as well that yes, I think almost certainly the functional roles of knowledge workers, especially people who are talking to customers, will evolve. And what I had made a couple of arguments here is this for two reasons. One, if you think about a lot of the work that we do in large businesses and enterprises today, for creating efficiencies, we have built tools, but these tools are very siloed tools. So we become experts in using certain tools for certain functions, and our roles in a company are limited to the kind of tools that we have expertise on, and the kinds of content and information we have expertise on that we can answer from. If you imagine your dependence on these tools goes away, imagine you have a chat bot which can give you answers from across any tool that is sitting in the enterprise or from any document that's sitting in the enterprise, your ability to focus on customers becomes much higher, and you have a lot less worry about what your internal functional discipline and your tool discipline was. So I see that the transformation I'm seeing is what I call the business function transformation, is primarily we will probably have people who will become more and more customer-centric and less tool-centric, much more use case-centric and less internal department and siloed-centric. So I think that's the real fundamental second wave of transformation that these technologies will bring. Right now, most of the people are trying to apply generative AI as maybe the next better AI to make current systems work better. While that's fine, but I think the real fundamental change will come when innovators will start to break down the boundaries and the silos which were created over several years, just by the limitation that I talked about earlier.
Perfect. And I think that that's a great segue to our next two sessions. We have a short break now, and then we're going to come back with Patrick Martin from Coveo, talking more about generative AI and the different use cases within customer experience. And then we have, following that, a panel on conversational AI, build versus buy. So this is a great session. Deepam, thank you so much again for joining. Folks, you can continue to attend sessions that are building on this topic. We have a short break now, as I said, and then we'll be back with our next session at 11 o'clock Pacific. Thank you very much, Deepam. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Good luck.
Bye.